In 1979, Los Angeles was terrorized by the disappearance of several young women. Investigators later found out that Lawrence Bittaker and Roy Norris were responsible for the murder of 5 of them. The Halloween night, which crowned their 5-month killing spree, was later known as one of the most shocking, brutal cases in the history of American crime. They are known as the Toolbox Killers. Their toolbox not only consisted of regular stuff like pliers and sledgehammers, but also a vaseline jar, ice picks, and a tape recorder. Bittaker was described by FBI Special Agent John Douglas, one of the first and most well-known criminal profilers, it's the Mindhunter guy, as the most disturbing individual for whom he has ever created a criminal profile. Welcome to 10-Minute Murder, brief, bingeable true crime. My name is Joe, I'm the host, and I really appreciate you joining today. And before we get going with the story today, this is your reminder to subscribe. If you have not already subscribed to 10-Minute Murder, wherever you like to listen to podcasts, probably where you're listening now, just make sure you hit subscribe and also connect with 10-Minute Murder on social media. Links for that are in the show notes of this episode, as well as at 10minutemurder.com. And just as a heads up, if you are familiar with this case, you know that it is extremely disturbing. And on social media, I will post photos, but not the photos that you're thinking that I might post. I don't make it a habit of posting gruesome and graphic photos on my Instagram and Facebook. And for this case specifically, I encourage you to not look up photos. It's so unbelievably disturbing that I can't even begin to describe. You don't want to see it. I promise you don't. And just looking up the photos to post that are safe for me to post to social media, you come across some of these and it makes you sick to your stomach, and just don't do it. Okay, now to the story. Lawrence Bittaker, the baddest of the bad apples in this murderous basket, was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on September 27, 1940. He was deprived of love, unwanted and rejected from the moment he was conceived. His biological parents left him on the orphanage doorstep after being born. Soon thereafter, Lawrence was adopted by a Mr. and Mrs. Bittaker. And Mr. Bittaker's job was in the aviation industry, and he made them move around the country quite frequently, which must have made an impact on Lawrence's childhood and his sense of stability. He quickly turned to the criminal path. He was arrested for shoplifting at the age of 12. During the next several years, he continued to steal, obtaining a minor criminal record. In his mind, with stolen goods and attention-seeking, he was trying to compensate for the lack of love that he received from his parents. Even though Bittaker was reported to have an IQ of 138, he didn't make use of it in high school. He ended up dropping out of it. After he didn't have the obligation of school, he filled his free time with car theft, a hit-and-run charge, and then evading arrest. He remained imprisoned in the California Youth Authority jail until he was 18 years old. After being released, his adoptive parents disowned him, left him alone, and he would never see them again. Bittaker's literal partner in crime was Roy Norris, born in Greeley, Colorado on February 5, 1948. Roy was also stigmatized ever since he was born, as he was conceived out of wedlock. And remember, it was the 1940s, so that kind of thing was extremely frowned upon. It's not exactly a welcome thing now, but it's much different now than it was then. So his parents decided to get married. Roy's father worked in a scrapyard, and his mother, unfortunately, was a drug-addicted housewife. Obviously, having a drug-addicted mother isn't the ideal family dynamic, so as a teen, he bounced around to different foster families in Colorado. Living with foster families surely wasn't a change for the better, as he was being neglected and allegedly denied food and clothing at times. Norris claimed that he was sexually abused at a Hispanic foster family home, which made him project his anger and pain onto all of the Hispanic people that he encountered later in life. In his teen years, Bittaker was already well on his way to a criminal career, but Norris had something of a paranoid madness about him. After a sexual advance toward an older female that was related to him was rejected, he feared a beating from his father. So Roy stole a car and fled to the Rocky Mountains. He felt misunderstood, and so Roy tried to commit suicide by injecting air into his arm. This obviously didn't work, and when he finally returned home, his parents informed him that he was an unwanted child. 1 year later, Roy became a high school dropout and decided to join the U.S. Navy. He was even deployed to serve in the Vietnam War in 1969 for 4 months, but was lucky enough not to witness any active combat. Every time Bittaker was released from prison, he immediately reverted back to crime. While serving one of his many jail sentences, he was examined by psychiatrists who classified him as highly manipulative, borderline psychopath. He was aware that his criminal acts gave him a feeling of self-importance and boosted his ego, but at the same time, he blamed his environment and upbringing for being unable to resist committing these crimes. Bittaker was a violent psychopath, clinically, so of course he was released back into the wild. And I'm not going to go into the details of Bittaker's rich criminal record, but let me briefly describe which act got him landed in the cell along with Norris. He stole a steak from the supermarket, and the employee who followed Bittaker outside and asked him to pay for it got stabbed in return. Luckily, the victim survived the assault, and Bittaker was caught and sent to California Men's Colony in 1974. When it comes to Norris, after a long history of sexual offenses toward women, he was diagnosed by military psychologists with a schizoid personality disorder. Once, he stalked a female student at San Diego State University, and he couldn't restrain himself anymore. He repeatedly struck her on the back of the head with a rock. As she fell to her knees, he beat her head against the sidewalk. Just as Bittaker before, after serving his jail time, when he was declared a man of no further danger to others, he was released. And surprise, surprise, he was indeed an ongoing danger to others as he raped a woman only 3 months after that release, which got him jailed again at the same prison as Bittaker. Bittaker and Norris became friends as they shared the same interests, like sadistic sexual violence towards women. Norris revealed to his bestie that his biggest kink was seeing frightened young women. Bittaker wasn't known for any sexual offenses before, but he hinted to Norris that if he ever was going to rape a woman, he would not leave a living witness behind. They dived into a violent fantasy world and regularly discussed plans of how to kill one girl in each teenage year from 13 to 19 years old. They made a pact to make their dreams come true after being released. After serving their sentences, Bittaker got himself close to teen girls by organizing parties and offering them weed, whereas Norris could only manage to restrain himself for 1 full month before he raped a woman again. Soon, they met to finalize their twisted plans that they had concocted in prison. The first step was to turn Bittaker's silver 1977 GMC van into Murder Mac, and that's what they nicknamed it. The pair would cruise Southern California in that van, scanning the hot beaches in search of young, attractive girls in bikinis. Blonde girls were what Bittaker had his eye on. From the summer through the fall of 1979, the pair snatched girls into the cargo van, which had no side or rear windows, to torture, rape, and kill them. The kidnapped girls were the ages of 13, 15, 2 16-year-olds, and an 18-year-old. They duplicated the 16-year-old category by mistake. Their first victim, Cindy Schaefer, was abducted while walking down the street next to the beach. They made sure that the van's blasting stereo would muffle her screams. They reportedly raped her several times in a secluded spot up in the mountains. They strangled her afterward and left her body to be devoured by wild animals, as it was never recovered. Encouraged by the initial success, they became more brutal thereafter. Their second victim was 18-year-old Andrea Hall. She was raped only by Bittaker because Norris was disgusted by her period blood, but he didn't seem to be disgusted by the blood that spewed from her head after she was stabbed in the ear with an ice pick and then strangled to death. And then was the youngest of the victims, 13-year-old Jacqueline Leah Lamp and 15-year-old Jackie Gilliam. They were seized and taken to the mountain spot again. They were held captive and repeatedly raped for about 2 days. Norris, in order to satisfy his fantasies of having sex with a family relative, made the younger girl pretend that she was his cousin and made her pretend to enjoy the rape. He followed by projecting his anger toward women by crushing her nipples with vice grips and pierced her breasts with an ice pick. After realizing that manual strangulation wasn't as easy as it was depicted in the movies, Bittaker used a wire from a coat hanger, tightened with pliers, to kill. However, the worst act of torture was yet to come. That Halloween night, 16-year-old Shirley Lynette Ledford's nipples were torn off with pliers. Bittaker used a tape recorder to record her screams of pain and her pleas for help. They had tortured, hit with a sledgehammer, raped, and beaten her in the worst ways possible, taking pleasure in her piercing, high-pitched screams. After 2 hours of torture, they strangled her, then discarded her body in a public place on someone's front lawn in order to see how the newspapers would react. In November of 1979, Norris made a mistake and boasted about the rape and murder of Shirley in front of his former cellmate, Joseph Jackson, who informed the LAPD about it. Jackson's confessions matched the missing persons reports and the description given by the only girl who survived the Toolbox Killers' rape. A raid of their house provided authorities with Polaroids of the tortured girls. The purpose of the contents found inside Bittaker's van left no doubts. A sledgehammer, a book detailing how to locate police radio frequencies, a Vaseline jar, and a tape recording that detailed the murder sessions. Upon investigation, it was revealed that if they hadn't been caught that time, they would be using acid on the next victim, as they had already prepared the bottles. During the trial in 1979, Norris stated that the acts of immense torture and humiliation had been committed for fun. The level of unspeakable brutality increased in each act gradually, reaching its climax when the van's sliding doors closed behind the last victim. The main factor wasn't the sexual intercourse itself, but the feeling of power and dominance they had over the victims. They both seemed to be driven by a compulsive need to inflict pain and torture upon women. The only remorse Bittaker felt was for the fact that he and Norris were arrested, which he says ruined his life. Lawrence Bittaker, possibly one of the most sadistic sexual psychopaths in history, was sentenced to death in 1981, but he died of natural causes at the age of 79 at San Quentin State Prison in 2019. Roy Norris died of natural causes at the age of 72 at the California Medical Facility in February of 2020, 2 months after Lawrence Bittaker. Quoting Stephen Kay, the prosecutor, quote, "I'm upset that he beat the system. He died a natural death, something that his victims didn't have a chance for."